Hello class, welcome to week 3, day 4, expectations. Just like the other videos, I'm going to be going over the expectations first and then reading the close reading out loud. Alright, let's go over the expectations. First, we're going to be doing that close reading of day 4 and 5. Starts on page 48 to 53, and you guys are going to be underlining and highlighting important information. Write down questions or ways that you're related to the material. Again, one per paragraph. If there's small paragraphs all next to each other, just count that as one paragraph. I'm okay with that. After you do that close reading, please create your own quiz with 5 questions and 5 answers that covers the material that you just read. This is supposed to be like, how deep can you get with the information? These questions and answers can really only exist if you have read this material, so that's really what I'm looking for. Can you demonstrate your learning through creating your own questions and then answering those questions? Those questions and answers should be in complete sentences. After that, please complete or finish any math homework from Miss Moore. Review and practice movements from mystery class. Again, I sent that document a few Sundays ago. If you don't have it or you haven't been practicing it and you need that document again, please email me and I'll be able to get that to you. And then after that, make sure that you are just moving in general, such as walking, running, or anything else. I know some families or some students have been going on walks with their families, so that's awesome. Continue doing that, and then also figure out some other stuff to be moving, such as like a YouTube video where you learn a dance or something like that. Alright, so those are the expectations. Again, close reading, 5 questions and answers, quiz, math homework, mystery, and moving. Great. Page 48, close reading. Days 4 and 5. In 1519, Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan began his voyage with 5 ships and about 250 men to find a western route to India and Asia. The Portuguese had established their route by the east, and Columbus had determined that another continent lay in between in the west. But unlike the English, who would decades later look for the Northwest Passage through North America continent, the Spanish believed that there must be a way through the South America continent. Ferdinand Magellan was born in the year of 1480 to a nobleman and his wife in the Portuguese mountain town of Sabroso. When he was 12 years old, he left his home to apprentice at Queen Leonora's school for pages. A man named Duke Manuel supervised the pages and took an instant dislike to Ferdinand. Despite this unfortunate circumstance, which Ferdinand's persistent efforts didn't change, he was happy he was a page. He was taught music, dancing, etiquette, hunting, and swordsmanship. He was also instructed in map making, astronomy, and navigation. Ferdinand dreamed of the day when a ship's officer he could sail in search for riches or new places. Unfortunately, by the time Ferdinand was old enough, Duke Manuel had become king and stood in the way of him going to sea. In those days, not just anybody could go to sea. They had to have the blessing and support of the king in order to gain command of a ship. Eventually, Ferdinand was able to enlist as a lowly sailor. He worked his way up by determination and effort. He had many trials in his early life at sea and was seriously wounded twice in battle. He was left with a limp for the rest of his life, but this did not stop him. He was obsessed with a desire for adventure. Finally, in 1519, after breaking with King Manuel of Portugal and giving himself to the service of King Charles of Spain, Ferdinand Magellan took up the challenge to circumnavigate the world. First, he hoped to find a waterway through the continent of South America. Next, he hoped to prove that it was possible to sail all the way around the world, either leaving from a certain place and arriving back at it by going all the way around, or by going first to a place by sailing east and then going back to this place by sailing west. Either way would prove that you could sail all the way around the world. Nobody that he knew of had ever done that, and nobody knew if it could be done. As a sailor, he had once been on a ship that sailed east and discovered a group of islands called the Philippines. At that time, he had assumed that they belonged to Spain and had angered King Manuel of Portugal by saying so. He wondered if he would ever be able to find those islands again. Now, Magellan did not have a shiny, clean boat for his voyage around the world. He had 5 old ships in need of repairs. The ships he would sail himself was the Trinidad, the second largest of the 5. King Charles of Spain helped him prepare his tall, square-rigged ships for the long journey. For long-distance ocean voyages, the food and drink had to be stored in barrels for long periods of time. Drying and salting were the only methods of preserving meat, fish, fruit, and vegetables. Often the flour became infested with worms and weevils. The food was not nearly as appetizing as your food. Wine and water were taken to drink, but sometimes they went bad or ran out. Constant inspections were needed to check on how well the food and water were surviving the voyage. If anything was found to be bad, the crew had to consume it immediately. The cooking was done by boiling on the deck with a bucket of water kept nearby in case of fire. Meals were served on deck. Think what it must have been like for those explorers to be out of contact with their homeland for months, facing hunger and thirst and possibly death from storms and shipwrecks. Disease was rampant. Many sailors got scurvy from the lack of fresh fruit and vegetables, typhoid from bad water, food poisoning from rotten food, rat bite fever from the rats that infested their ships, or typhus from lice. Magellan and his men set sail on September 20th, 1519, heading across the Atlantic to the coast of South America. They had many adventures, including bitter disappointments and arguments, especially when they found themselves facing part of the winter anchored in the icy waters of the Antarctic. They were weary and disheartened when on October 21st, 1520, a year and a half after they had set sail, they achieved Magellan's goal of finding a waterway by going around the southern tip of what we know to be South America. Rounding the tip meant negotiating amongst many tiny islands, now known as the Straits of Magellan. But then his 5 ships were down to 3. He headed into the strait and spent the worst 38 days of his life. The winds were violent, the air freezing, and the strait narrow. The sea was rough, the waters were fast and dangerous, and so deep that there was no way to anchor. They had to tie the ships to outlying rocks to get rest. It took them over a month, but finally they pressed through the strait and came out into the ocean. As Magellan sailed out of the waterway he called El Paso, which was now called the Strait of Magellan, into the calmer waters of the ocean, he displayed the flag of Spain. The priest who traveled with the expedition led the men in prayer and singing a hymn of thanksgiving. Then Magellan shouted victoriously, "We are about to stand into an ocean where no ships have ever sailed before. May the ocean always be always as calm and benevolent as it is today. In this hope I name it the Mar Pacifico." He discovered and named the Pacific Ocean Pacifico because it means placid. He followed it north along the coast of Chile to a latitude near the equator. There he turned west, hoping to sail in just a few days to Asia. He thought it was now just a short distance to the Spice Islands. But where he thought the Spice Islands lay, 4 degrees south of the equator, was only mere empty sea. He sailed for 2 months without seeing land, realizing daily that not only was the Pacific much bigger than he had imagined, but the whole world was much bigger than he had dreamed. The crew's food and drink began to go bad. Maggots covered everything, and the sailors had to hold their noses just to drink the water. They began to get sick, and by January of 1521, almost a third of them had died from scurvy. A month later, they found a tiny atoll and stayed for a week to fish and rest. They replenished their drinking water by catching rainwater in their sails. Then they sailed on. By early March, all their food was gone, and they knew that within a few days they would die. 2 days went by. In the early morning, the lookout screamed, "Praise God, land, land!" They were greeted by hostile natives, so Magellan and his men fired the ship's guns to scare everyone away, and spent several hours feasting on any food that they could find before sailing on. This island is now called Guam. 9 days later, they again reached land, and Magellan realized it was the same series of islands he had found in 1511. When he sailed eastward from Malacca, as Ian Cameron, one of Magellan's biographers, wrote, after 550 days of storm and mutiny, hunger, pestilence, and death, he had circumnavigated the world. He had arrived at the Philippine Islands. In addition, he proved that the world was round because he reached the Orient by sailing west from Europe. Here is the course Magellan took. Magellan put to sea from civil Spain and charted a course south towards the South America. He continued southwards and at last arrived to the southern tip of South America continent and found a strait running west between it and the islands just offshore. The journal of one of them who sailed with Magellan says, "So noble a captain, he was more constant than anyone else in adversity. He endured hunger better than all the others, and better than any man in the world did he understand sea, charts, and navigation. The best proof of his genius is that he circumnavigated the whole world, none having preceded him." When Magellan reached the Philippines, the ruler of a nearby island boarded the Trinidad to speak to him. He invited the sailors to come ashore. Magellan and his men developed a cordial relationship with the native people. Many of them seemed to want to be Christians. An outdoor Catholic mass was held, and thousands of the natives were baptized in the ceremony. Magellan was so excited by this that he decided to try to spread the faith even further. One of the chiefs of the islands had let it be known that he had no intentions of bowing to Spain or the Spanish religion. Magellan proceeded despite the warning. The natives opened fire with bamboo lances, staves hardened into fire stones, and even darts. Magellan was struck in the leg by a poisoned arrow. Finally, an angry islander succeeded in thrusting the end of his lance through the bars of Magellan's helmet, wounding him in the forehead. Magellan died in the Philippines. The sailor's journal says of this moment, "Thus perished our guide, our light, and our support. On falling and seeing himself surrounded by the enemy, he turned toward us several times as if to know whether he had been able to save ourselves. As there was not one of us who remained with him, but was wounded. And as we were consequently in no condition either to afford him succor or avenge his death, we instantly made for our boats. To our captain, indeed, did we owe our deliverance, as the instant he fell, all the leaders rushed toward the spot where he lay. The remaining men left quickly for the long voyage home, escaping with only their lives. 6 months later, after meandering about the Pacific, they managed to make it to the Spice Islands. After trading there, one ship from Magellan's original 5 made it back across the Indian Ocean and across the Cape of Good Hope. There was much danger from the jealous Portuguese guarding their trade routes as from the weather. Some men were captured by the Portuguese and others died of scurvy. By this time, the first voyage around the world landed in Spain. There were only 18 left of the 250 men who had set sail, where 5 ships sailed away. Only 1 came back. By the 16th century, enough of the world had been explored for map makers to be able to show the continents of Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas quite accurately as well as we know them today. However, it was believed that there must have been much landmass in the southern hemisphere as there was in the north in order to keep the globe balanced as it rotated. Therefore, it was believed that there was a lost continent somewhere below the tips of Africa and South America, and maps of the time showed a vast landmass covering a huge part of the lowest or most southerly part of the globe. When New Zealand and Australia were first discovered, it was believed that they were the tips of this lost continent. The Spanish and the Portuguese had established themselves as masters of exploration and the conquest of far lands. England was a relatively poor and small country by comparison, but it had determined an ambitious ruler, Elizabeth I, who wanted to share the world's wealth and who wanted a hero of the sea as well. In 1577, she secretly sent Sir Francis Drake as a privateer to pass through the Strait of Magellan, plunder Spanish gold ships along the coast of Peru, and return. If he was caught, he planned to deny any involvement with an independent pirate. After rounding the Strait of Magellan, Drake was blown far south off course. He soon realized that there was no 6th lost continent in that part of the southern hemisphere, as had always been thought, which his maps showed. There was no need to go through the strait. He would simply sail around further south in safer open water. Drake managed to capture Spanish ships laden with gold that were making their way up the western coast of South America towards Central America. However, Drake had trouble finding a way back to England. He did not want to risk the Strait of Magellan again, as the Spanish were itching for a fight, and the eastern way back through was considered even more dangerous than the west. He could not go over land through Panama, as the Spaniards did not bring their gold back to Spain, as it was heavily fortified by the Spanish. He explored the California coast and northwest Canada, trying to find the other end of the Northwest Passage, but to no avail. The only option left was to cross the open waters of the Pacific. Drake reached the Spice Islands after stopping at the Philippines. The islanders had recently driven out the Portuguese and were interested in trading with the English. After returning to England, he led Elizabeth's conquests against the Spanish colonists in America, including the burning of their settlement, St. Augustine in Florida. Finally, in 1588, Philip I of Spain assembled the Armada, a group of 130 ships and 30,000 men to attack and defeat England. The attempt was a disaster as it was carried out as if the Spanish were taking over American land from native people, and not an established warfaring nation like its own. Drake led the defeat of the Armada, further earning him the respect of the Queen and his country. The English would eventually take control of the trading routes to the East and North America, becoming some of the richest and most successful colonists and merchants in the world. Drake is the man who inspired this era. So that was a lot of reading. Yeah, I probably stumbled across a couple words, but I hope you guys enjoyed that information, enjoyed that close reading, and then next you guys are working on creating a... Actually, we're not doing that just yet. Hope you guys enjoy.